Warning: Crescent City Crime contains violent and explicit content that is not suitable for a younger audience. Some topics may be disturbing or triggering for sensitive listeners. Listen at your own risk. Thank you for listening to Crescent City Crime. If you wish to further support the show, please make sure to like, rate, and review this podcast on your preferred listening platform. We can also be found on YouTube at Crescent City Crime. You can discuss episodes with other listeners in our private Facebook group or follow us on Twitter. You can also visit our merch store. All of our social media links, show notes, sources, and more can be found in our blog, nolacrimepodcast.com. That's NOLA, N-O-L-A, crimepodcast.com. We are now on Patreon. On our Patreon, we feature discussions about movies that revolve around crime and offer exclusive merch. If you would like to hear that extra content from us twice a month and access exclusive merch, subscribe to us at patreon.com/Crescent City Crime. We would appreciate it if you help spread the word about Crescent City Crime. Tell a friend or aggressively scream our podcast name at your enemies. The music used in this episode is The Black Fingerprint, and it was composed by Dylan Owen. Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
And I wanted to start off this episode with some good news. Brian, I've got a little audio surprise for you. You're going to find out right now on this podcast that today we get to celebrate 50 plays total of our podcast. Every episode has been listened to at least once. Our first episode on capital punishment is the one that was listened to the most.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, and it's very exciting because we've been at this for about a month, I think. A month ago, as of this recording, is when I started dropping those preview episodes. And so in that space that month, we got 50 plays. I'm really happy about that.
That's a good start.
It is a good start, yes. So I have and there's also a very nice woman that I met through a Facebook group several years ago. Her name is Karen, and she had some very kind words to say. She said that she listened to the first two episodes and she enjoyed them. She likes the banter and she thinks it flows really naturally. She wants to listen to more episodes, and she likes how you, Brian, adds in various tidbits from your professional and personal background. And she also appreciated that we shouted out the sci-fi community as a good place to, uh, uh, sorry, it could be a good community for young people. She appreciated that because Karen, like us, is also a nerd.
Oh yeah, definitely. Chances are you're not going to get into any trouble at the comic book shop, the gaming shop, or the science fiction convention.
That's quite true. I think perhaps the most trouble I've ever had at a gaming shop was when I would lose at Magic cards.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and thanks to everyone for listening.
And we also have a new influx of people in the Facebook group. So thank you to everybody that I did invite a bunch of people, and I think most of them responded. So thank you to everybody who joined us in the Facebook group now. And I did want to talk a little bit about how this podcast came to be. Brian, as you know, right now we're in the beginning of 2022, and I started this project in 2020 when we were in lockdown, and it took a while to get everything together. I have a a whole list of topics planned. I have scripts that I've researched and written, and it takes a while. But at the end, all this legwork that I had to do, I feel like it was worth it.
Well, yes, when you get a podcast ready, or say a broadcast of any kind, you typically spend more hours preparing for it than you actually spend broadcasting.
That's very true. But you know, I have wanted to do a podcast for a long time. You know this.
Yeah.
And it's always about finding that unique angle. You have to think of something that's not really been done. And I know that true crime is this is kind of a saturated field. Like there's a lot of true crime podcasts, true crime documentaries, YouTube channels, et cetera, et cetera. But why not? Why not throw your hat into the ring?
Oh, sure, sure.
And I also wanted to update you guys on. So when we did the episode on the cold cases where we mentioned Thomas Rolfs, what what happened? I think 2 days after we uploaded that episode, Brian,
The case was solved.
they caught the murderer,
Yeah.
and we will come back with another update on that in a future episode because I want to see how it plays out. I want to see what happens. Is there going to be a trial? And just as a side note, this is going to be a larger topic for another time, but our current district attorney who is embattled, he is facing federal charges for tax evasion, right?
Yeah, most of the, I believe it's 18 federal counts are regarding tax evasion. Sad commentary on some of the voters in Orleans Parish.
Yeah.
He was under federal indictment during his campaign and during the election, so voters voted for him for just to be district attorney for the city of New Orleans, despite a federal indictment hanging on him. And
He's
regarding federal indictments, the federal government moves slowly before they actually go for the indictment because they want to make sure everything is right. They want to make sure all their ducks are in a row because they know when you're going up against a high profile figure that the individual is going to have good representation.
yes.
So the average uh,
Federal case.
federal the average federal assistant federal attorney has to spend a considerable amount of time, getting things lined up so that they can defend against these high powered attorneys who command
A lot of money.
a lot of money because they're very good at what they do, and chances are this defense attorney has already been a federal assistant U.S. attorney, so and probably has more experience than the U.S. attorney they're going up against, as the prosecutor. So it took a while for this to play out.
And it's still playing out. The trial, he hasn't even gone to trial yet, and I believe it's been delayed again.
Yeah, that's, I'm sure Jason Williams doesn't really mind that at all.
Well, the point that I was really trying to make about Jason Williams is that so far in his time in office, he's been in office for over a year, and he has not bought one murder conviction yet.
And right now, including an appearance before the New Orleans City Council, he's pointing the finger at the superintendent of police. And of course, the superintendent of police is pointing the finger right back at him.
Yeah, there's quite nothing like local politics. No matter where you live, local politics is always going to be more interesting to me than federal.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
The old saying goes, all politics are local.
Until they're not.
Yeah, national politics is a sexy topic, but I mean, truly, the politics that affect you the most are your city and your state.
Yes, and oh, Brian, you did mention something after we record our last episode about a vampire on a billboard.
Yes, in that little public drama that went on between um,
Anne Rice and Al Copeland.
Anne Rice and Al Copeland. At one point, Al Copeland he rented this billboard to promote that restaurant on St. Charles Avenue, Straya, which I like to forget it ever existed.
Sorry.
So, and on the billboard in the background, he had a caricature of Count Dracula.
Yeah.
which is kind of laughable as well. It's kind of silly because that's not quite the kind of vampire that Anne Rice wrote about.
So Anne Rice did not write a story about Count Chocula.
No, not really.
No. Well, so that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, and over the past couple of weeks, there has been unfortunately, a terrible tragedy. A woman who was a mother of two teenage daughters. She had at some point separated from her husband. She got addicted to meth and she got involved with the wrong guy. And unfortunately, he murdered her and dismembered her body and put it in a freezer. Of course, this is something else that I am paying attention to. And as soon as everything shakes out, trial, whatever, I wonder. I wonder, how this is going to play out. Will it go to trial? It might not, but I want to have a resolution on this case of the victim's name was Julia Darter, and she was killed by a fucking piece of shit who had no regard for her life at all. So we are just going to wait and to see what happens before we do a full episode on that. Now, all that we've already said, Brian, are you ready to get into what today's story is about?
Sure.
All right. In 2009, a jury in Orleans Parish convicted Peter Richard Rubens of second-degree murder. Rubens was an artist as well as building contractor. On June 29th of 2008, Rubens shot one of his employees, Robert Irwin, 4 times in the chest and killed him. While he initially claimed self-defense, the true motive would eventually emerge. Rubens owed Irwin money and was also secretly dating Rubens' girlfriend. And did you know that I have a little bit of a personal tie to this case?
Yeah, he used to work at the hotel.
Yes, the hotel that I worked at. However, he had already came and gone. This had already happened by the time I had started working there. And I'm not sorry for trashing this guy because his artwork is butt ugly. I never did like the artwork in that hotel. In fact, there was one time when I mentioned to a guest, she was talking to me about how much she disliked the art, and I told her that Rubens was a murderer, and she exclaimed, "I knew it. The feet are disproportionate to the rest of the body. I knew there was something wrong with the artist." So, yeah.
Oh.
So maybe it really does show in your art.
Well, unfortunately, some artists are actually psychopaths.
Well, yes, that is
Apparently,
true.
yes.
Or they're killers, or they're just bad people in general.
I mean, keep in mind that a psychopath can very does not have any inhibitions regarding the taking of any life whatsoever, whether it's an animal or it's a person, or
Well, what about like a crime of passion?
or a cockroach.
Well, what about like a crime of passion?
That's when That's when some psychopaths manifest the tendency.
Okay.
I mean, keep in mind, not everybody settles these kinds of disputes by murdering someone.
That's true.
And the average person has tremendous respect for human life and animal life, and it takes a lot to overcome your desire not to kill someone.
Oh, like when we were talking one of the other episodes about how when somebody who has a beef with somebody sees them on the street and it just overrides everything else, and they just go into that like a tunnel vision.
Yeah, they go in the tunnel vision mode and they just engage each other. See, basically all psychopaths are sociopaths.
Okay.
Okay, keep that in mind. And the thing about sociopaths is that they don't really have much of any conscience. They don't have
Right.
empathy for anyone. A sociopath could be someone who thinks nothing of engaging in corrupt business practices,
Right.
overworking employees.
Or they could be politicians.
Right, could be politicians. Yes, a sociopath's going to see people as numbers. Now, sociopaths who are psychopaths, those are the people who can just easily take a life. So there are times in which it when a psychopath has a disagreement with someone, that could be the the first course of action is to kill that person. Whereas the
Hmm.
average person is not a psychopath and is not going to just want to literally kill somebody to
Hmm.
settle a disagreement.
Okay. Well, there was not a lot of information about Robert Irwin, but he was 47 years old at the time of his death. He was employed by Rubens as a building foreman, and his friends called him Bobby or B. And of course, at this time, the city we were still recovering from Hurricane Katrina, so there were plenty of sweet contracting dollars to be made. You remember that? Like you remember
Yes,
everywhere you had just work trucks and employees and everything construction.
yes, and most notably there were a few unscrupulous,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
definitely unscrupulous
contractors.
sociopaths who were ripping people off, taking money in advance for work, and then running away. Of course,
That's true. That did happen a lot,
there's
which is also goes back to another thing that we said previously on this podcast is vet people. If it's a legitimate contractor, they will have excellent references, they will have insurance and all that stuff.
yeah, they'll have an insurance bond, and you ask to see their insurance bond, and it's not good enough for them to just have the certificate because they could have canceled the insurance. What
Yeah,
you do is you look at the contact information on the insurance bond,
and call the insurance company.
yeah, to verify that they currently have an insurance bond. Um, but even with a legitimate contractor, no, you don't pay in advance for any work. You don't even pay half. It doesn't. It's that's not ethical.
No, it's really not. And we've saw when we're talking a little bit about this, just because we did see this go down with people that we knew, people getting shortchanged you know on their property. So, there was a lot that went on in the aftermath of Katrina.
So essentially, in the aftermath of every disaster, unfortunately, there's parasitic vultures who swoop in to try to steal people's money.
Always, in every tragedy, there's always people like that. So at the time, well, right before Rubens was uh, had committed this murder, he was planning to leave the city for a project in Iowa to win a debris contract removal in flooded areas of that state. There is a court document that broke down the events of the day that led to Irwin's murder, and I'm going to summarize it. Prior to Irwin's death, Rubens was living at a house that was owned by someone named Ray Manning. In that house, Rubens lived with his girlfriend Diane. The agreement between Rubens and Manning was that he was repairing the house while he lived on the upper floor. The arrangement between Rubens and Manning eventually soured, and Rubens was planning to move to Iowa. And he was going to take a group of workers with him, but Robert Irwin was not one of those workers, and Rubens was not planning on taking his girlfriend with him either. So, with the knowledge that we have now, witnesses at trial testified that Irwin had been having an affair with Diane. He even wanted to build a life with her once Rubens was out of the picture. On the day of the murder, Irwin spent the day with his friends Lynette and Alan Betts. He was in the process of purchasing the Betts' motorhome which Irwin was already living in. The Betzes had a house in New Orleans and the motorhome was parked in a driveway. That was something else that happened. You had a lot of people living in motorhomes on their property while their houses were being repaired, or were living in FEMA trailers on their property, et cetera, et cetera. It was crazy,
Yeah, or people living in FEMA parks and trailers
which we did,
and having to
and
drive back and forth to the property to
and it
work on
and
it.
it really sucked.
Yeah.
Now, edit that part out. Okay, that was right across the street from the house that Rubens was living in. Lynette's son, Jess Salt, and his girlfriend, Emily Shelton, drove Irwin to New Orleans that day, and Irwin had told them of his problems with Peter Rubens. He knew that Rubens and a group of his workers were soon to leave for a job in Iowa, and he wanted to get back home in order to safeguard his tools and to ask Rubens for the money he was owed. Lynette Betts was concerned about Irwin confronting Rubens and stated that Robert felt like somebody probably could die that night. Isn't it? That's ominous.
Oh.
Now, Jess Salt testified that Irwin told him on the ride from St. Rose, Louisiana to New Orleans, if Rubens pulls a gun on me, I will shove it up his ass.
Oh.
Now, despite these comments, Jess Salt and his girlfriend Emily both testified that Irwin's demeanor was calm and relaxed when they reached the house. The door to the home was open and there were men on the porch around the home. When Irwin exited the vehicle, he walked straight into the house. Eventually, Jess Salt walked up to the residence and yelled for his friend and for Robert Irwin to come from inside the house. And Rubens told Salt that everything was fine. On his way back into the house, Irwin joked with the men. Jess then heard gunshots and screaming. The men who were hanging around the house were now running away. Rubens was yelling at Jess, "You got a problem? I'll put you down like I put Robert down."
Oh. Mm-mm.
Jess did not see a gun, and he told Rubens that he could not leave until Robert came out. He looked down and he saw Robert Irwin on the floor. He could see that he had been shot. He was suffering and moving only slightly. Jess called 911 immediately, but sadly, Robert Irwin died before EMS could arrive and Rubens fled the scene. The homicide detectives on this case were Detective Long and Detective Wei Shan. They arrived on the scene about 30 minutes to an hour after the shooting. The primary scene was in an office that was located on the second level of the residence, and there were 4 spent .380 caliber shell casings and a spent bullet that was recovered from the scene. Detective Long's investigation revealed that all the shots were fired in the office. The secondary scene was where Robert Irwin was found on the first level of the residence, just below the stairwell. A trail of blood was discovered along the wall and the handrail of the stairwell, so it's like he tried to run.
On a side note, basically 380 is the same diameter as 9 millimeter. The European name for 380 is 9 millimeter short, or 9 millimeter Kurz in German, and the the 380 round originated in Europe because European civilians were forbidden to have for a long time were forbidden to have 9 millimeter because it was a military cartridge. So the 380 developed as a result of that as a civilian caliber essentially.
Okay.
But it caught on over here because it was discovered that you could design a 380 handgun as a smaller gun than a 9 millimeter, more concealable.
Huh. Okay. Like this could have been a gun that was in his pocket.
Oh yeah, the average 380 pistol is very easy to hide in a pocket.
Well, after Rubens used that 380, he was, fled the scene. He was named as a suspect that very night, and an arrest warrant for second-degree murder was obtained at 11:55 p.m. on the night of the killing. So that was fast. What do you know what the logistics are of getting a judge to sign a warrant that late at night?
It's going to take if you're lucky, it's going to take 30 minutes. If you're not so lucky, it's going to be as long as 2 hours,
Hmm.
because sometimes it's uh, I mean, detectives are only going to get a judge out of bed if it's very important.
Hmm. Okay.
But a capital offense, yes,
It is really
that
important.
warrants that warrants getting a judge out of bed at night. It does.
Hmm. All right. Well, the detective searched for the defendant unsuccessfully, but later that night, when they returned to the residence, they noticed that the front porch light that was on when they had previously left the crime scene had been turned off, and that a light was on in the second floor bedroom, which had been turned off when they had left. So, see that the detectives returned to the scene and they noticed that the lights were different. So, we had talked previously about how typically the first detectives or police officers to arrive on a scene, if they arrive within a short amount of time,
Hmm.
they're usually the ones that solve the case, and that happened here.
Yeah, yeah. They
So,
notice small details, but the comment I want to make about the waiting for EMTs to arrive
hmm
when you have someone who's bleeding, you need to do something to stop the bleeding. You need to get something and apply direct pressure and stop the bleeding before EMTs arrive.
well, I'm assuming that so this was he was shot 4 times, right? Probably at a close range, and then he managed to get down the stairwell. Now, if he was shot at close range, I mean, 4 times, it obviously hit something vital. How fast is your window for that?
It depends on where you hit. I mean, you hit 4 times. That's of course that's definitely multiple shock trauma. Although 380 is a lighter round than a 9 millimeter, it really depends upon where you hit. But he was probably already bleeding out when he was walking down the stairway, which unfortunately that hastened his bleeding.
Yeah,
But like uh, the worst thing you could do if you call an ambulance for someone that's bleeding is just wait for the EMTs. No, you have to find the entry wound, and if there's an exit wound, you got to find that too, and you have to apply something to stop the bleeding.
right.
Um,
A shirt, a tablecloth.
a Kotex.
Yeah, a Kotex, even a tampon itself would.
Yeah, very, very, very effective because Kotex is very similar to like a compress that EMTs and like the military use. Just the same as like if somebody has drowned in a pool, you call EMS. Don't just wait for them to get there.
Try rescue
You
breathing
got to do rescue breathing. Tilt their head, administer 2 full breaths, okay,
and pump
and
the
then
chest.
curve the head to see if the water comes out, but keep administering breaths until the water comes out or they start breathing again on their own.
Right,
Okay, because there's the brain's got about a 10-minute window.
right.
Just for example. So
Now, is that 10-minute window death or brain damage?
brain dead.
Okay,
Okay.
so like you would be on a respirator if you lived.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, just wait for that's why the Red Cross teaches first aid. That's why Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts learn first
Mhm.
aid,
Mhm.
because he gets it out into the community that just waiting for EMS is just not good enough. That's because if someone receives first aid of some kind before EMS arrives, then that can make all the difference in the world.
Right. And that's very true. And I know it's hard, and we will talk about this on a different podcast. But I am not. Sometimes I can be calm in an emergency, but you're really good in emergencies, and we'll talk about that later in a different podcast because I actually am really impressed with how you handle emergencies.
Is I've had a colorful life and I've been through a few emergencies.
I guess you have. Okay, so after the detectives noticed the difference in the lights being on and off in the house, they called a tactical unit, and the tactical unit found Rubens hiding in the attic. So he was there. He went back to the house and he hid in the attic after he left the evidence of the lights being on and off.
Yeah, diligent detectives and police officers are going to find you whether you're hiding in the attic or you're hiding under the house. If they think you're hiding under the house, they'll bring a dog.
Yeah, they will.
And now, most of the time, what they do is they threaten to let the dog loose, to physically grab you by the leg and drag you out from underneath a house, which, one of those strong shepherds or malamutes.
Malamutes or Malinois.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can just grab you by the leg and drag you out from underneath the house, and it's very unpleasant. So usually the suspect will come out from underneath the house voluntarily.
We know somebody, a police officer who got bit by a police dog. You remember? He
Yes,
had a
yes.
big bite on his leg.
Yeah, he's retired now, so it's okay. Sergeant David Liang. It was during evacuation for which hurricane was it?
Was it after Katrina?
It was one that came after Katrina.
Maybe it was. Is that Ivan? Was it Ivan? Maybe.
I think so. Um, and there was this deal to where the dog bit into his thigh instead of the suspect,
Yeah.
and he very calmly let the dog handler remove the jaws from his skin, and then he simply he applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and he finished his shift, and then he went to the emergency room, and he still has the scars from the bites on his
Yeah, he
thigh.
does.
So
So yeah, if you're gonna commit a crime, you don't want the dog's jaws on you. It will hurt.
yes,
Just give yourself up.
give yourself up before the dog gets involved.
Now, on the scene, Detective Long advised Rubens of his rights immediately. Like your right to remain silent, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Rubens immediately began saying that he had to kill Bobby because Bobby was coming after him with a pencil.
Oh, pencil.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I do understand that
Daisy.
that
Daisy.
legally, okay, legally in the state of Louisiana, a pencil can be considered a deadly weapon. Okay,
Right.
but that's a situation that is very gray for two reasons. One, it's a pencil.
And you have to be in a very certain position to actually harm somebody with it. Like you would have to, I imagine, like you'd have to stick it in their eye or in their ear or something.
Right. Going with, of course, Louisiana legal terminology, a reasonable person would not feel threatened by someone pointing a pencil at them
That right.
in most situations.
Especially if you have a gun.
Right, exactly.
I would imagine if somebody's coming after you with a pencil, if you drew a gun on them, they would probably drop the pencil and leave.
Probably would. I mean, you could even use the gun to you could hit them with the gun
Well, that's
physically,
true. Yeah,
to
yeah.
defend yourself. But I mean, like a pencil, a reasonable person's not going to feel threatened by a pencil. But the other reason why, of course, that's gray is that he knows the victim. You see, so
Yes.
self-defense claims become highly questionable if you know the victim.
Hmm.
You see, because it's very gray, it's very complicated. I mean, at that point, yes, you're going to go to trial because you know the victim, and the uh, it needs to be sorted out. It has to be hashed out.
Hmm. Well, when Detective Long asked Rubens where the gun was, Rubens claimed that he had dropped the gun by the body. He said if he still had the gun, he would have killed himself, which I really, really doubt.
Yeah, I doubt that too. That's just he's just trying to play on someone's sympathies there.
And it was after this when Rubens invoked his right to counsel. So he did shut up, but not soon enough to not incriminate himself.
Well, anything you say before you invoke your right to counsel is going to be admissible because he, at that point, when he confessed to them on the scene, he was already waiving his right. Okay.
Yes.
Now he was already told he had the right, advised he had the right to remain silent, and then he waived his right, and then he assumed, then he reserved his rights after he confessed. So that confession's absolutely admissible.
And we're going to circle back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with expensive attorneys. And while expensive attorneys are a part of rich people justice, you know what else is a big part of rich people justice? Being quiet. Don't tell them anything. Don't say anything. Just be quiet. Do not try to explain your side of the story. Just be quiet.
Yes, because you can. Not everyone understands laws of deadly force or anything involving, say, reasonable force when it comes to like the application of physical force. So you can unwittingly confess to an additional crime
Yes.
if you're being investigated by the police.
And when the police say, oh, we just want to talk to you, what they're really doing is they're trying to get you to say something.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So just be quiet.
And some detectives, they they want to get you to incriminate yourself so they can just have something to charge you with.
Yes, that's very true. Detective Long contacted another detective named Garcia, and Garcia had remained at the Manning residence, and Garcia was asked to conduct another canvass of the office to see if she could locate a pencil out of place. There was no pencil out of place, and the gun was never found. Rubens always admitted to shooting Irwin, but he claimed that it was self defense since Irwin walked into his home without having called or knocked first. Even though Robert Irwin was unarmed, the defense attorney Eric Hessler claimed otherwise. Hessler attempted to argue that Irwin entered his home without knocking and proceeded to attack Rubens with a thick carpenter's pencil. So it wasn't just like a little number two pencil. You were saying it was one of those thick carpenter pencils. You know what I'm talking about?
That's still
It is.
grasping at
It is
straws.
still grasping at straws. But I just wanted to clarify, just in case people were thinking a number two pencil. No, that they were saying it was a carpenter's pencil.
That's still pretty flimsy.
Well, the prosecution promptly mocked this claim, and the in response to this, the defense attorney held up a contractor's pencil in the courtroom and waved it at the jury and said, "You want to take this back and stab each other with it to see if you can cause great bodily harm." So he wanted the jury to stab each other with this pencil.
And of course, that as reasonable people on a jury, which uh, after voir dire, the screening process, everyone who's on the jury is considered to be a reasonable person.
And I've never made it past voir dire. I've never actually sat on a jury.
Yes, and I've never sat in a jury, but I played a juror on television once.
Yes, you did. That's true. That's
Yeah,
very true.
yeah.
Yeah.
Episode 1 of BJ Novak's new show, which can be screened on Hulu, streamed on Hulu.
It's called The Premise, right?
Yeah, the show is called The Premise, and I'm one of the jurors in the middle of the jury wearing a green polo shirt, and I got quite a bit of facial time because BJ liked my reactions.
Oh, and you should
And
tell them how about the Dunder Mifflin mask
yeah, the second day of filming, I wore a Dunder Mifflin COVID mask to the set.
that we bought at Walmart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that got BJ's attention pretty quickly, and he had his